All right. Thank you for being here. Chet Galaska, writer, diabetes educator, I'm sure many other things, but I would like to talk about diabetes and writing. Which topic would you like to start with?
Well, my main purpose right now is diabetes. I'm retired. Um, I was in heavy industry for most of my career. I was in the foundry business where I co founded a company with a partner and sold my interest a number of years ago. But I've had diabetes since I was 29 years old. And I've learned quite a bit about it, including how much misinformation there is out there about diabetes. So what I've decided to do is make educating the public my retirement project, and that's why I'm doing these podcasts and getting out in a variety of other ways too. I'd like to explain why I'm doing this, and it gets back to a situation I had in Chicago a number of years ago. I was there during the week when Ron Santo was inducted into the Baseball Hall of Fame. I didn't realize it until he was inducted, and I read all those articles in the local papers. I didn't realize that he had diabetes back in the 1960s. He kept it to himself because he was afraid the Cubs would fire him if they found out. So the only other person on the team who knew he had it was his roommate, and his roommate was good. He kept it a secret, and nobody knew that Ron had diabetes until they had Ron Santo Day to celebrate his career back in 1970. But what struck me is a story that actually happened in a game. They were in Chicago. It was the last of the ninth. There were two men on base, two outs, and they were down by 2 runs. So Santo was in the on deck circle, and a situation started happening to him. And I have to break off here and give you a little background information first. When you take insulin, which Santo was doing, you can have low blood sugars. Now, low blood sugars are a problem because if they get low enough, it affects your brain. Unlike other tissues in the body, the brain takes glucose directly from the blood for energy. And if there isn't enough in the blood, then the brain starts to go haywire. You can start sweating. You can see double or triple. You lose your coordination. If it gets really low, you can pass out. So it's a serious thing. Luckily, it's easy to fix. All you have to do is eat something sugary. And when your blood sugar level comes back up, the brain comes back online and you're back in business. So back to the story. Santa was in the on deck circle and he feels the symptoms of low blood sugar coming on. He can't go back to the dugout and tell the manager he needs a candy bar. So he just prayed that the guy at the plate would make it out and retire the side. Well, instead, the guy walked. So now it's bases loaded, uh, down by 2, and 3 men on base. So Santos said he walked up to the plate and he looked up, seeing triple. Saw 3 pitchers, 3 scoreboards, 30 some odd people standing out in the field. When the pitcher threw the ball, it looked like they had a slinky attached to it. So he took a swing at it, connected, and put it out of the park for a walk-off grand slam home run. He made it back to the dugout in time to eat his candy bar, and nobody knew about this for like 11 years. That's how secret he kept it. So that's a great story. People think the big part of the story is hitting the grand slam home run, but anybody who takes insulin or certain type 2 medications knows what the low blood sugar feels like. And that's what the real drama was. Santa was running around those bases, all the while knowing he could collapse and pass out in front of 20,000 fans. So that's the real drama there. So I started telling the story when I got back home, and that's when I realized how poorly most people understand diabetes. What also surprised me was that people asked me about type 2 diabetes. I have type 1. And what I believed about type 2 was incorrect. A lot of what I believed was typical of what people usually believe about type 2. And I realized that if somebody like me doesn't understand type 2 at all and believes all these false things about it, then our society has a real problem. Uh, and so that's what I'm trying to fix. I'm trying to get the word out as to what the real facts are about it, because too many people ignore their disease or they feel guilty about having it, which they shouldn't. Uh, and they get a lot of grief from other people about it. And not everybody gets that, but a lot of people do. So it's a bad situation that needs to change.
So then type 1 is, from my understanding of it, is the diabetes that you're born with, and type 2 is the type that you acquire. Is that your understanding of it?
Well, nobody's born with diabetes. The way it works is that you're born with a genetic predisposition for it, and then something in the environment triggers it. That's true of both type 1 and type 2, but they're different diseases. I'll explain that later on.
Okay.
But, type 1 used to be called juvenile diabetes because generally young people got it, then older people didn't. But that's changed. As I said earlier, I got it when I was 29 years old. So I was no child when I got type 1. And it turns out that anybody can get either type at any age. That's why they changed the names from juvenile diabetes and adult onset diabetes to type 1 and type 2.
Okay. So then the difference then is one is insulin production and the other is sugar
Yeah,
entering the cells, or
yeah. Let me explain them quickly. When normal people eat food, it gets digested into glucose. Glucose is a simple sugar. It goes into your bloodstream and it provides your body with energy. It goes all over your body, into your body cells. When your pancreas senses that there's glucose in the blood, it produces a hormone called insulin. Insulin's job is to be a key that gets into the bloodstream along with the glucose, and it acts as a key that unlocks the cells so that they allow the glucose to enter. When that happens naturally, the glucose goes into the cells burn it for energy, and at the same time, it's leaving the bloodstream. So this happens fairly quickly, and your body is able to keep your blood glucose level within a fairly narrow range. So it's a wonderful thing the way it happens. But in diabetes, that whole process is short circuited. It doesn't work right. In the case of type 1, it's an autoimmune disease. And what that disease does is it triggers your immune system to attack your pancreas, and it destroys the insulin producing cells, and therefore you don't produce insulin. So when somebody like me eats without taking insulin, my blood sugar rises and it stays high. And that's what the problem is. Chronic high blood sugars are very damaging. So in
and
my
that's
case,
because you don't have the key to get the sugar into your cell.
exactly. Yep. So, and this happens fairly quickly. Sometimes it'll take 2 or 3 months to manifest itself, but within that short amount of time, your capacity to produce insulin is dramatically reduced. Effectively down to zero. So people like me have to take insulin. Insulin breaks down in digestion, so you have to take it subcutaneously. You either take injections, or today we have other mechanisms we can use, but it's got to be administered under the skin. The other type, which is the more common type, which is actually the one that 90 to 95% of all diabetics have, is type 2. And that's a different disease entirely. That starts with a condition called insulin resistance. And that condition is exactly what the name says. Your body cells become resistant to insulin. So your pancreas has to make more insulin to overcome that. And over a period of time, it gets progressively worse naturally. As it's getting worse naturally, it's putting more and more pressure on your pancreas so that it winds up working overtime and then producing tremendously greater amounts of insulin. Eventually, your pancreas starts to wear out and it can't keep up. So when that happens, you don't have enough insulin to open the cell doors. And that's when the blood sugar becomes high, and it stays that way unless you do something about it. So they're really different diseases, but they're both diabetes because the term diabetes simply means high blood sugar. So those are the two main ways that people manifest diabetes.
So diabetes 1 then, or yeah, then that means you don't have the key to open the cell, and then
Right.
Second diabetes is you don't have enough keys, or you progressively need more keys to open up the one cell.
Exactly.
Okay.
And the idea that you need more keys just gets worse and worse to the point where by the time you're diagnosed with diabetes, with type 2 diabetes, you've lost up to half of your pancreas's ability to produce insulin
Oh.
because all that overwork has worn it out and killed them. So it's a serious thing.
How does the body, or how does the pancreas make insulin? What is that? Is that obviously it's something that you can put in there, so you're getting insulin from somewhere else. So where does the insulin come from in the body, and then how do you make a substitute insulin?
Well, I can't get into the biochemistry. it's,
Okay.
it's
All
not
right.
my thing. But there are certain cells in the pancreas. They're called islet cells.
Mm.
That's ISLET. It's the word for island. The reason they're called that is that they're distinct little cells that look like islands, and that's why they were named that. But those are the source of insulin, and I really can't explain to you how it works, but it does. And those
So when
islet
you
cells, yeah, those islet cells are what go bad. The type 1 immune system will kill those cells off. They don't kill off the whole
mm.
pancreas. It's just those cells.
So when you take insulin, how's that made? Is that from another animal? Is it just a lab made thing, or how do you make insulin?
Well, yeah, it used to be that they would refine insulin from beef or pork. And they did that for many, many years. It wasn't until like the 1980s that they developed a artificial insulin. Now that's what we do. We don't use the pig or the cattle pancreases anymore. But back in the day, that was an amazing thing when they discovered insulin. It's quite a story how that happened, by the way. Uh, Diabetes has been around forever. The Egyptians talked about diabetes, and throughout the centuries, they tried to figure out what was going on with it. But it wasn't until 1925 that insulin was discovered, and it happened by accident. It was these guys were doing research up in Canada. Their names were Banting and Best, and they were working on. I'm sorry. Let me back up. Banting and Best did the refining of the insulin. It was discovered by another guy who was doing research on dogs. And what happened is they removed the pancreas from a dog in doing the research. And overnight, the dog urinated, and a janitor wasn't doing his job, so he didn't clean up the mess. One of the scientists noticed the urine on the floor and decided to test it. And what they found is sugar. So it was pretty obvious that whatever the substance was that controlled blood sugar, it came from the pancreas because that dog did not have a pancreas. And from there, they tried to figure out what hormone in the pancreas was responsible for it. Eventually, they discovered that it was insulin. With Banting and Best, they're very famous people. Matter of fact, they're Canadians, and the 100th anniversary of their refining technique is next year. So I talked to a podcaster in Canada, and he was telling me how that's going to be a very big event in Canada. That's what a life-changing thing this was.
Hmm.
But Banting and Best managed to refine it enough that you could use it safely. And from 1925 on, diabetics had a way to live. Up until that point, they died every single time.
So then when you put insulin into your body, whether it's synthetic or from some other animal, it goes in, unlocks the cells, the sugar enters, and then your own body, your immune system attacks those cells, those that injected insulin, and eventually absorbs it or gets rid of it, and then you have to
Well,
inject more later.
yeah. I mean, the insulin is used up. Once you put it into your body, um, it just gets used up. It's funny. You never had that question before, but it it disappears. It doesn't stay in your body. It's used up when it opens up the cells. I would think that's what happened, because
Okay.
the insulin doesn't stay. But this is a complicating thing about diabetes. If you're injecting yourself with insulin, you must have enough glucose in your bloodstream to use up the insulin. Otherwise, you wind up with low blood sugar like Ron Santo did in that game.
Hmm.
So it's a very tricky thing to try to balance the two. Back in the day, it was really a lot of guesswork. Even when I got it back in 1981, the only way you would know what your blood sugar was by using this stuff called test tape. It was a paper, a yellow paper that came in a dispenser that looked like a tape measure. You would pull out an inch or two of it and dip it in a urine sample. And if it stayed yellow, your sugar had been good. If it turned various shades of green, you would know that your sugar was higher than it should be. If it turned black, you knew that your sugar was really high. But, that was pretty imperfect because you were testing your urine, which meant that that sample was from urine that was produced an hour or two earlier. So this was not real-time information. It's lagging information. But it gave you an idea. If it was really high, you would take some more insulin to try to knock it back down.
Hmm.
So it was much harder back then to have good control. But in the 1980s, they came up with monitors that people could use individually. So at that point, all you would have to do is take a little blood sample from your finger, and this little machine would analyze it and tell you what your blood sugar was right at that moment. When that happened, that was a sea change. I mean, all of a sudden, you could really control your blood sugar much, much better than you ever could before. So that was a monumental development. And the care has gotten a lot better since then too. It's pretty amazing what's being done.
Is much research going into how to repair the pancreas so it can make insulin versus treating diabetes, or is the money in the treatment and not the cure?
No, I think there's really a good faith effort going on to try to fix it. But diabetes is a really complicated disease, and matter of fact, it's so complicated that some researchers say that it's possible that no two cases are exactly alike. And you've got millions and millions of cases out there. So it's really complicated. And they've tried lots of things and they just haven't worked. Every once in a while somebody says, well, I've got this cure that works. Like, for example, one that was really promising was they were developing a fabric that would encapsulate islet cells that were taken from elsewhere. It might be peg islet cells, or maybe even another human islet cell. But they were hoping to package those in this fabric and then implant it in the body, with the idea that the islet cells would sense the need for glucose, the need for insulin, and then produce it. But they've been working out for that for decades, and it just doesn't work. And frankly, nothing has so far. So at this point, we're doing really well at learning how to treat this, but you can't cure it. That, by the way, is one of the issues that I'd like to explain. There's a lot of misinformation out there about diabetes, and one is the use of the word cure. Even some medical people say you can cure diabetes, but what they mean by cure is not what you and I typically think cure means. We think that if you've cured something, you've dealt with it, you fixed it, and you don't have to deal with it anymore. But the people who use the term with diabetes, what they mean is that you've controlled your blood sugar well enough to keep it below a certain threshold for a certain amount of time. And that's fine, except that you do that by controlling your diet and exercise. And if you stop doing those things, then your blood sugar comes right back up. So there is no cure. And it's too bad because people really think there is. And, if you're a diabetic, people have to look at me and say, well, I know there's a cure. Why doesn't he do that? Well, it's false information.
Yeah. They got to agree on what definitions are. Words mean things.
Yeah, I mean, you ought to be upfront about it anyway. What I find is that a lot of times the terminology is just plain misleading. And I wish people would be more direct about it.
So even if your body, if you don't have to take insulin and your pancreas is producing insulin as it's needed to address your blood sugar to get the sugar into your cells and all that to work correctly, that's not really a cure then in the one sense. That's just your body keeping everything in check. It's functioning as it needs to in order to get the sugar into your cells and get rid of excess sugar.
Right.
Hmm.
Yep.
Yeah, it's in the definitions. So then if you have excess sugar in your blood, does that just go out through urination then, just like the dog that didn't have the pancreas? The sugar is
Yeah.
just in the
Uh,
urine?
yeah, exactly. That's what happens. If you've got diabetes and you haven't been diagnosed, uh, you're probably peeing a lot and drinking a lot. That's what I found. In fact, before I was diagnosed, I was on a business trip and I got really thirsty. So I bought myself some orange juice and I drank that. Well, I got so parched that I could barely speak. It's because when I drank the orange juice, my sugar was already high and I just boosted it up even higher. So
Mhm.
what your body does when it's high like that is it tries to expel it, and it does that through urination, of course, to make yourself go more and flush it out faster, and it makes you thirsty, so you drink a lot. So that's exactly what happens. Your body tries to flush it out.
And when, from my experience in law enforcement, in dealing with DUIs, oftentimes if you have excess blood sugar, you present as a DUI. You have that fruity smell
Yep.
coming from your mouth because your body is trying to get rid of that extra sugar so much. And you also have a different cognitive state that may come across as intoxicated because you just have so much sugar in there.
Yeah. It's everything about diabetes is more complicated than you think it is. Uh, when somebody has really, really high blood sugar like that, they do get lethargic, but it's not because of the blood sugar itself.
Okay.
What's happening is that your body isn't getting the energy it needs, and it can't get it from the glucose because there isn't enough insulin to do it.
Mm.
So what it does instead is it breaks down fat cells, and when it breaks down the fat cells, it creates acids, and the acids created by that are what make you incoherent, and they actually poison your bloodstream. And that's where the fruity smell comes from too. It's from
Right.
the ketones that are produced by that acid. So it's if it's really high like that, you certainly can be incoherent, and actually it'll kill you if that goes on long enough. Uh, Ketoacidosis, which is what it's called,
Hmm.
that can be deadly. That's why people die from a condition of high blood sugar. But on the other hand, we talked about Ron Santo with this problem with low blood sugar. So somebody who's got insulin really is on a tightrope. You're trying to balance your blood sugar so it's not too high, but also so it's not too low. So you always have to be aware of where your blood sugar is. In fact, with
From
diabetics, yeah, go ahead.
from my training and experience, it was always told to us that low blood sugar is more dangerous than high blood sugar. Is that the case?
It is, uh,
Okay.
and
Diabetic
that's
coma versus ketoacidosis. Yeah.
yeah. With the big problem with the low blood sugar is that things can happen really fast. With ketoacidosis, it takes a while for that to develop, and it's not going to kill you like instantly. But with low blood sugars, the low blood sugar won't kill you, but if you pass out and you fall down and hit your head on a table, that might kill you.
Mm. Mhm.
So the idea that you might pass out is that's really what the danger is there. But luckily, I mean, most of us know when the low blood sugar is happening. There are symptoms that we have. Sweating is a common one. Your eyesight getting funky is another one. Um, turning pale there are lots of symptoms. I'm fortunate in that my wife is pretty attentive to this. I've had this for over 40 years, and she's pretty much seen it all. But she can tell that my blood sugar is going low before I do. She'll tell me, you look pale. Better check your blood sugar. Uh, so it's something you should be aware of. If you're attentive as a diabetic, you should know these things.
Yeah, one of the first responder things that was you had to be able to diagnose more. I guess it's not so important. I mean, it's important to be able to tell the difference between somebody that's intoxicated versus having a medical issue.
Right.
But also the other thing after that was, how do you tell the difference between stroke and diabetic? Low blood sugar for my experience, is the one that looks most like that, to where you have to rule that out, check the blood sugar before you make that decision of, is this person like this because of some sort of restriction in blood in their brain, or is it the sugar one? So
Right. Well, you guys, you EMTs, you're pretty sharp. You see this all over the place. I would imagine if you're an EMT, you don't go for more than a month without seeing a low blood sugar somewhere along the line.
yeah.
I'm sure that after a while, you just start to recognize it. First thing you do is check the blood sugar, and chances are that's what it is.
Yeah. And with all the new tools for that, like the monitors that a lot of people wear, and then just the new testing equipment that is so much quicker than the older ones were, it does make it easier to diagnose. I mean, that's the big thing of whether you transport somebody or not, is you gotta troubleshoot it.
Yeah. And and you are good at it. The problem is that, the cop on the street, a lot of times they're not educated the way you are, and there have been cases where guys or women with low blood sugar get arrested for drunkenness and whatnot. It turns out to be low blood sugar. It'd be good if just the regular cop on the street was more educated about this situation.
Yeah, you got to get that training. And most of the time it comes from hearing a story of what happened to someone else, or knowing someone with diabetes, or having it yourself. And then you're like, oh, okay. So you get tuned into it a little more than the average person would be. I think in the academy, we probably got training from it. The EMT stuff obviously trained more of it, but yeah, not all police are EMTs. I don't think so.
Yeah.
What are those environmental triggers then that cause diabetes, that can cause it at any age and either type?
We don't know, and that's one of the problems. I think in my case, I think it was a virus. I never got sick very much. In fact, I still don't get sick very often at all. But I was really, really sick for a few days, a couple of months before I was diagnosed. So personally, I'm convinced it was a virus. And there are other people who have the same experience. But it could be lots of things. It could be something you ingest, that they just don't know.
So by virus, do you mean some other virus that just had the side effect of messing up the pancreas, or some virus that has a specific component that messes up the pancreas?
Yeah, that I don't know. I know that, well, first off, you need the genetic predisposition. So my body was predisposed to getting type 1 once it was triggered. So, the viruses that are out there, I mean, other people got the same virus I did. I got it from somebody. And the chances are they didn't become diabetic because they didn't have the genetic makeup for it. In my case, I did. So it triggered it. At least that's my own theory. I can't imagine what else it might be because, like most people, my lifestyle doesn't change that much, from day to day or week to week. So there was nothing extraordinary I did.
I would think it'd have to be something that it enters into your body. So it's either through some sort of food, some sort of additive in foods, or
Yeah.
additive that predisposition, or some virus, or
Yeah. Well, unfortunately, you know about as much about this as I do. At this point, it's just speculation because nobody really knows. which is one of the
We're waiting
maddening
for a
things.
couple Canadians to figure it out.
Well, so far they're pretty good at
Yeah.
it. Yeah, these guys, diabetes, we because we treat it so well now, we kind of forget how serious this disease really is. Back before 1925, if you had diabetes, you were going to die. Period. It was just a question of making you comfortable in the meantime. And a lot of people had diabetes. I think a lot of people think that this is somehow a modern disease. It's not a modern disease. It's been around for a long time. The difference is that now you don't have to die from it, although many people still die from it.
Mm.
And that's another thing I'm trying to get across. You can't take this less seriously just because we know how to treat it. There was a guy, a former employee of mine. I'd known this guy for probably 30 years. And I ran into him a few years ago. Let me back up a little bit and give you a little background here. He was my employee at a time when I had diabetes, but I kept the diabetes to myself because I didn't want people thinking less of me because I had it. So nobody knew about this unless you really needed to know. So he was a guy I'd known for a long time, but he didn't know that I had diabetes. So when I ran into him, it turned out he was in a wheelchair. Um, and he explained to me that he had type 2 diabetes, but he didn't take care of it. He said after a while he couldn't take the pain any longer, so he went to the hospital and they took one leg off on one day and the other one on the next. A couple of years after that, I went to his wake. He had died of diabetic complications. And I think about that because of the stigma that exists about diabetes, where people think that you did something to bring it on yourself or you're not managing it well or whatever they might think. Because of that, I kept it to myself. And I wonder if he had known that I had diabetes back in those days, maybe he would have come to me and said, Chet, I've got diabetes. What can you tell me about it? And maybe I could have helped him. I could have explained to him, you if you don't treat it, it will kill you, and get his attention that way. So that's something else that I'd like to do is make sure everybody understands the basics of diabetes so that we get rid of the stigma. We respect people who do the hard work of managing it and get more people to treat it well.
Do you know what the mechanism is that causes limbs to have to be amputated? Is it just the cell death from not getting the sugar into it when it needs to, or what
Well,
causes that?
this is how I explain it. If you take a glass of water and you dissolve sugar into it, what happens to the water? It gets sticky. You're doing the same thing to your blood when your blood sugar is high. You're making your blood sticky. The result of that is that plaque builds up more readily in your blood vessels, and after a while, it closes them down.
Hmm.
People get amputations typically in the lower extremity, meaning the toes, feet, and legs. That's because those are the farthest from the heart, so the blood pressure is lower there than in other parts of the body. So it's that plaque buildup that destroys circulation, and in doing that, it helps hurt your ability to fight infections. So that if you get a cut as a diabetic, number one, you've got a lot of sugar in your blood, so the infection will grow faster in that environment, but you also can't heal as well. So that's the reason. It's damage to the circulatory system.
Okay, that makes sense. Then? What's the advantages and disadvantages of a ketogenic diet then, where you try to cut out as much processed sugar as all processed sugar and reduce other sugar intake? I mean, just through fruit or whatever is to a minimum.
Yeah, it makes sense. The easiest way to keep your blood sugar in control is to not let it get high in the first place. So the keto diet does that. It's very low in carbohydrate. Carbohydrates, by the way, are the thing that people need to understand the most. Carbohydrate basically is sugar. If you eat a gram of bread, it will digest into a gram of sugar. It's a one-to-one correlation. So often people don't get that. I guess I figure carbohydrate is sugar junior or something, and it's not as critical. But when you're eating carbohydrate, you are really eating sugar. It just hasn't been digested into the glucose yet. So with the keto diet, their thing is to stay away from carbohydrate. And in doing that, you will keep your blood sugar lower. In fact,
And then
the keto diet is great in the respect that because it's so popular, there are a lot of recipes out there. So if you're looking for a low carb, good tasting food, you can go to a keto cookbook and get some ideas.
does your body change anything? Does your body your brain especially run on sugar exclusively? Or does it, if you're on a ketogenic diet, is it taking some of that stuff and changing it to sugar to feed the brain? Or is the brain operating on fats?
Well, yeah, the brain comprises 5% of your body's mass, but it uses 25% of the energy.
Yeah.
So it uses 25% of that glucose. Um, in fact, when I'm sitting, I do writing, I do podcasts. I'm sitting here talking to you. I'm burning glucose as we're talking here. Then my blood sugar is getting lower as we talk. When we started, I made sure it was high enough that I could let it go lower, and I would still be fine. But your brain uses a tremendous amount of glucose. I'm sure there are other things that uses too, but I'm not aware of those. But the glucose is certainly a big thing.
So then does your body, no matter what you eat, is your body going to change some of that to sugar so your brain, or glucose, so your brain can function? Or does your brain function on other things?
Well, if there isn't enough glucose in the blood, it'll start breaking down that fat. I was talking about ketoacidosis earlier. That's where the energy will come from. So your body will go to the fat, and it's a substitute for the glucose.
But
But
that's not fatal, right? I mean, you can not eat sugar and your brain is still going. Is your brain still running on sugar, or is it running on
well,
something else?
it runs on.
Glucose.
I can't think of the name of it, so I'm not going to guess at it. But it runs on the energy that's produced by breaking down the fat. And like
Okay.
everything else, just because you're breaking down fat doesn't mean you're going to have ketoacidosis. Excuse me.
So the brain can function on glucose and other things, not just glucose on its own.
Yeah.
It just
I,
likes
I,
that the best, or it's more readily available because it gets into the blood so quick and then you can take it out so quickly.
well, let's put it this way. If how every once in a while somebody will they'll be in a place where they can't eat sugar. They're out in the wilderness or whatever, uh, and they wind up surviving anyway. That's because your body is breaking down that fat for the energy that it needs, and your brain will be able to function on that. Like most everything else, it's a question of degree. How much fat are you breaking down? Within limits, you can certainly do that, and you'll be fine. But if it gets extreme to where you're breaking down a lot of fat and you're creating those acids, well, then you will really be in trouble. So it's just, how much.
Because a ketone is the byproduct of breaking down fat, right? It's not, your body isn't running on ketones. That's just what you measure to be able to say your body's running on fat.
Yeah, that the ketones I know are what is dangerous. Whether that's what your body actually uses for energy or not, I don't know. But you asked me a question that I've never had before, so I'm going to have to look that up and have the answer.
I did the keto diet a couple years ago for about 6 months and lost a lot of weight because you're not eating sugar. You're drinking water and eating meat, eggs, things like that.
Right.
And I did feel better. I mean, sugar's a drug for sure. And I mean, everybody I think is probably a fiend for sugar, but it takes that, whatever it takes to limit the amount you have. If you have some sort of thing going on in your body where you feel terrible or you can't processed sugar, I'm sure that changes your relationship with it. But now I try to avoid processed sugar still. You get that every now and then. And then when you have fruits or something with natural sugar in it, then it tastes so much different, even after a short time of not eating processed sugar.
Huh.
But the keto diet, if I could do it all the time, if like I had that, let's just say the discipline enough to just do that, then I think I would feel better. And it did feel like my brain was functioning better. And then I read a lot of stuff about it. And there are these people that talk about being, I can't remember the word for it, but diverse your body, molecularly or metabolizingly diverse, where you have that equipment to break down carbs and that equipment to break down fats, and your body can switch back and forth between that pretty easily if that's how you train it to. But the way I looked at it was like a factory floor. If you're eating processed sugar, the body says, let's move all this stuff that burns fat out. And when we get fat, we just store it over here and we're going to process this sugar because that's what we like. That's easy. That's what we're set up for. And
Yeah.
then when you stop doing that, it has to clear the factory floor, bring in all the fat processing things and process that. But if you could stay in the point where you're just doing the fat, I think that's probably best. But otherwise, have a little bit of both in there so you can, if sugar slips in, if you just happen to have that candy bar or whatever, or a soft drink, which is probably some of the worst stuff to eat, but your body can deal with it more easily.
The body's an amazing thing. By the way, we're talking about fat. The common wisdom out there is that being overweight causes diabetes, and it doesn't. This is one of the big myths out there. Most overweight people don't become diabetic, while many thin people who work out and eat the right stuff do become diabetic. It's because it starts with that genetic predisposition running into a trigger.
Mm-hmm.
And it's too bad because people feel guilty about having diabetes. Most of us are overweight. NIH says that 70% of us are overweight. So it's pretty easy to look at yourself and say, well, I'm overweight, so I got diabetes. I've got only myself to blame. And other people think that too. They look at a diabetic, well, he's overweight. It's got what he deserved. Well, that's not what happens. But weight is a factor, but it's not a factor in the way that anybody thinks. There are two main kinds of fat. There's subcutaneous fat, which is a soft, squishy stuff that's under your skin. But there's another kind called visceral fat, which is hard and it's packed internally around your organs. Well, subcutaneous fat doesn't have much to do with diabetes at all, but the visceral fat does because it makes insulin resistance worse. If you lose fat, the first fat that goes is the visceral fat. And by doing that, you can reduce insulin resistance, and that does help diabetes. So it's a little complex, but it is a factor. I used to do classes before COVID. And one of the most gratifying things that would happen is for somebody to come up to me after the class was over and tell me that the best thing I told them was that they did not bring this on themselves. You can see the guilt just drip off their faces because they feel so much better about themselves knowing that they didn't get this because they're a little overweight. So it's a damaging piece of misinformation that's out there. And I wish they would stop repeating it.
Yeah, I remember watching documentaries told from both sides where it said that diabetes is caused by meat. And then I can look at another documentary that says diabetes is caused by sugar. And then you have to go, okay, well, now I got to think for myself and figure out what's going on. And that's how we started doing like the keto diet and being, we were vegetarians for a long time and then went to whatever the more radical version of that is. And then back to eating meat. And the best I felt that I can remember where I'm tracking what I'm eating is the mainly meat and protein and no processed sugar. But
Wow.
the most fun you have when you're eating is, the sugar stuff, the processed sugar, the ice cream, the soft drinks, all that stuff where you get that immediate dopamine release or whatever. You don't
Yeah.
the eating the keto diet or the carnivore diet or whatever you want to call them. It's that long-term sustained, you just feel good. You don't have those big highs and lows. And
Yeah.
it's tough. Sugar's definitely a drug. It's definitely a drug. And that's what I tell myself every time I get that sugar craving, which is, okay, I have a little bit better understanding and empathy for the drug addict, because I'm like, yeah, okay, you got to go to this house and buy your heroin every day and get your fix. Well, that's what you're doing when you're going to whatever store and get your drink and your candy bar or whatever it is that you're eating. You're getting that same type of fix. So it's a little perspective.
It seems like when you look at the broad scheme of things, it seems like everybody's getting their dopamine rushes somewhere,
Mm.
whether it's gaming or gambling or whatever. There's a zillion ways to get your dopamine rush.
Pick your poison.
It's amazing how many there are out there. This is a little off the topic, but think back 100 years ago, people just did not have the stimulation that we have today.
It makes
You
you
know,
wonder if Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure is really accurate. Like, was Napoleon that interesting, or was he not so interesting, or did he really like ice cream that much? But
so, remember the scene in the bowling alley?
yeah,
Pulling out of the bowling alley.
yeah. What
Yeah,
a movie that just twists your understanding of history and everything, and you're like, oh, okay. Now everybody thinks that Napoleon and Genghis Khan were okay to hang around with and wouldn't be a problem. Although I do like the saying, Napoleon was French when French was cool. I like that, but I'm not
yeah,
sure about
right.
it. It's just a fun thing to say.
Well, I thought, it's unbelievable to me that Keanu Reeves actually went from that movie to being the big star he is. I thought Bill and Ted would be a B movie for forever. Although
Yeah,
in
and
my
then
mind,
Bill kind of dropped off. Yeah.
yeah, Bill dropped off. Yeah, Bill.
Mm.
Although they did a
Lost Boys,
sequel.
and that was it. Yeah.
Yeah, have you seen the sequel?
I did. I don't recall it so much. And I liked the Bogus Journey one, not bad either. I mean, where it had station and death and all that, and they were going around. So I thought they were fun movies. I haven't seen them recently. I think I did see the third one when it came out. Not memorable to me as much, but
Yeah, the last one was yeah, that was forced.
You
But
watch
anyway,
that and then watch John Wick and then go curl up in the corner and cry.
really. Oh well.
Nice guy by all accounts. I don't know him, but Keanu, he makes motorcycles and things, so that's pretty cool.
Well, I've never heard anything bad about him. Usually, if somebody's got some baggage, you find that out right away.
Yeah. So, what got you in, or gave you the idea to write a book about diabetes then? And is it your first book?
Well, when I started writing, well, first it's not my first book.
Okay.
This is really off topic, but my first book is called "Finding Faith in a Skeptical World." I'm a Christian, yeah, but I
Okay.
wasn't always. I was an atheist for many years, and a number of things happened that piqued my interest in faith. And the more I looked into it, the more it made sense to me. I discovered that the things that made me an atheist, when I really looked into them, they were actually points for being faithful rather than
Mm.
not believing. So I did the same thing with that I did with the diabetes book. I took the issues one by one and explained them in an easy to understand way. So that was the first book. Uh, with the diabetes book, I wrote that because of learning about Ron Santo and telling that story. That's when I realized how ignorant I was about diabetes, especially type 2 diabetes, and how most other people were also ignorant. And I know that there's a stigma out there that needs to be addressed. And I was retired. So I figured, well, why don't I just do this? You're looking for something to do in retirement. Why don't you do this? So that was it. I wrote the book. I developed a diabetes education course that's more of a rubber hits the road thing, where I explain things easily and doably. I did those courses in a lot of places at the YMCA. It was a medical center that I taught the course at a clinic a few times. University of Massachusetts, Springfield College. I was teaching this thing all over the place and finding the same sorts of things happen with a lot of people in that they didn't really understand the disease well. They felt guilty about it. And And so it just reinforced the fact that there needs to be some education out there, and it needs to be not just for people who have diabetes, but for those people who care for diabetics or care about diabetics, or just the general public, just to get the general public to understand that people don't ask for this disease and support those people who have it and encourage them to take care of it. So that's how it started. It all started with Ron Santo.
How long did it take you to write the last book that you wrote? Did you have like a schedule that you went to and said, I want to be done this part by this time, this part by this time, or?
No, I just kind of sat down. What I would do is pick an aspect, excuse me, aspect of diabetes and research it and call out the really salient points and put them down. It's a lot more work to write short pieces than it is to write long ones. And one of my goals was to make this as short and concise as I could. So it took me about a year to write the entire book. But what I would do with each chapter is to do the research. And where I went for research is the Joslin Diabetes Center, National Institutes of Health, American Diabetes Association, Mayo Clinic. These are all reputable sources that I drew my information from. And it took a while to do that. In a lot of cases, I had pretty technical questions, and I would go to actual NIH studies and read those. So it took time to do this, but I had the time. I was retired, so I wasn't trying to write for a publisher or had me under a deadline or anything. So
how did you go about publishing it? Did you do on Amazon or something else?
Actually, I set up my own publishing company.
Okay.
And then I went to Amazon and I got the books printed, and that's how I've been selling them. Going out speaking to groups about it and selling them that way. And there's been word of mouth. I've had locally here, I've had a number of doctors' offices that are selling them. So, yeah, I haven't had a big publishing contract. Just trying to get it out there.
When you were writing it, did you have somebody during the process that you would finish a section of and send it to them just to see if it was tracking or made sense? Or did you have like an ideal reader in mind to say, this is what I'm going for. I want to make sure they understand it, and then maybe send it to them before you released it?
Well, my wife would read it, and I think I'm a pretty reasonable critic of my own writing. In fact, I'm probably worse than most anybody else is. One of the reasons it took so long is that I would write, and then I would come back to the thing I had written 2 or 3 days later. And if you do that, you'd be surprised how many times you look at it and you think, well, that's not clear. What was I thinking when I wrote that? So you almost come back as though you're a different person with a different perspective. So I finally, I just did it between me and my wife, basically. However, when I went to Amazon, I got a whole bunch of reviews on that, and a lot of them were from medical people, and they would write in and say that this is something every diabetic ought to read because it lays things out so simply and concisely.
Nice.
So, yeah, I should send you a copy of the book. I think you'd like it. In fact, I know you'd like it. Um,
I can. It's available on Amazon, correct?
it is. Yep.
Yeah, I can pick that up.
Yeah, both books are
Contribute
on
to the
Amazon.
cause. Is
But
so.
even more so, what I've done over the past year is develop videos. That took a lot of time. I've done it the same way that I wrote the books. Just try to lay it out as quickly and concisely as I can. So I've got one video that's called "The Confusing World of Diabetes," where I explain things that are confusing. For example, we talked about fat and how fat doesn't cause diabetes. Or we talk about the cure and how there is no cure for diabetes. I explain a lot of things like that just to take all of the bad information out and then give people a fundamental understanding of what the disease is. The other video is called "The Nuts and Bolts of Managing Diabetes," where I talk about diet, exercise, and medication and the ways those are all important. But they're both under 25 minutes long. And the reason for that is, number one, I don't want people to have to spend an hour or two watching it. But the other is that I'm hoping people will show these in groups. The idea is that they can watch the video for the first half hour or so and then have a group discussion for the next half hour. So you could have a very productive and informative 1 hour meeting. The idea is that if you got a civic group like a Rotary Club or a church group or a book club or even a family gathering, if you could just take the time to look at this, everybody could be educated very quickly. At least get enough information that they don't spread untruths.
And on your website, there's a way that you can go and it's the gateway to looking at those movies, those videos that you made.
Yeah, you can either rent them or buy them. I've kept the prices very low. I wish I didn't have to charge anything, but I do have expenses, and it's just a way to cover that. But the way I look at it is, if you want to rent it for, I don't know, what am I charging? $6, something like that. You have a group of 6 people. It's $1 a piece. It's not going to break anybody. So yeah, if you go to my website, it's easy to access them there. And when you get them, they're delivered immediately.
Yeah, it shows current rent for $4.99, buy for $7.99.
Yep. Yeah. And if you want to see both of them, it's cheaper to buy them both together.
Okay. And on the your front page, your homepage of your website, challengediabetes.us, the gears at the bottom make more sense now, knowing that you are in the foundry business.
Yeah, you're clever to pick up on that. Most people don't even know what a foundry is.
Oh,
But
I've thought about making a hand tool company with, American made steel or whatever it is that you make hand tools out of. And I'm still thinking about it. But like when you try to find American made tools, it gets harder and harder, I think, more difficult. That almost all power tools are made in Taiwan or somewhere else now.
Yeah.
It's hard to find an American made power tool, but you can still find some hand tools that are made in the US. And it's one of those things where I think if I ever won the lottery or came across some money or found a way to raise enough to start a company, that would be one of them.
Mhm.
I mean, first, I think I would do an NGO called Why Are You Poor, which people can go to, and it explains why you're poor. Now, this is an oversimplification, but is it because you're lazy, because bad things happen to you, because you don't know a skill, or whatever? And then you can put them on the right track to be more self-sustaining. But then after I did that, I would go for the hand tool company.
Yeah, I think that NGO idea, that's a great idea. People have a lot of power if they assert themselves. But that's another discussion
Yeah,
too.
sure.
Things have changed a lot over the years.
When you were doing the foundry, where did you get most of your raw materials from?
Well, we started with scrap metal. So, I mean, the scrap metal business is a huge industry in itself. And what happens with metals is a mill will make a sheet of stainless steel. Then a fabricator will cut shapes out of that steel and it'll weld them together to make whatever the product is. Well, the parts that are left over are scrap. And what a scrap dealer will do is buy those leftovers. They'll cut them up into small enough pieces that a foundry can melt them. So that's where our main raw materials came from. Other additives like nickel or chromium, they came from mines. They mine it and package it and sell it to foundries. So that they came from a variety of places. Typically, like in the United States, we have our nickel came from the United States, and molybdenum, which is also a component of stainless steel, that comes from this country. But others are from all over the place. You know, chromium can come from Africa,
Yeah.
China, whatever.
Yeah. I'd like to see more stuff made in the US if possible. But
Well, you know, the problem is that American industry is really not on a level playing field. Other countries subsidize their companies, or they just have fewer regulations. You know, in the United
yeah.
States, the government regulates the heck out of everything. I mean, I could tell you stories about the government regulations I had to deal with, and you know, other companies just don't have that problem. If you're in China or lots of places, you know, it's just not the same.
Yeah. That's like the most striking thing of that to me is the ship breaking yards in India where
Hmm.
it's clear blue ocean and you're like, well, that's a place I'd like to go vacation. And then it's just you drive that giant ship as fast as you can to the shore, beach it, and then cut it apart in that environment with oil and all kinds of stuff just spilling out. And
Yeah.
the American side of me goes, oh, you can't do that. You're going to have to, collect all that stuff. But the rest of the world, maybe not the rest of the world, but other parts of the world, you don't have to worry about it. And then as an American, you go, well, I'm going to buy the cheaper thing because it's cheaper. And the reason it's cheaper is because it's at that cost of regulating. So or whoever, you want people to have a living wage, whatever that means, but you are willing to buy a phone that's made by slaves. So you're like, man,
Well,
it's,
that or,
it's
or
tough.
shoes,
It's
or
tough.
yeah, it
Yeah.
is tough. Well, you know, I mean, there are there are some regulations that you absolutely have to have. I'm old enough to remember when I lived right up against the Connecticut River. I remember when that river was green and the fish were floating, you know, upside down in the river.
Mm.
The water killed them. We live in a valley here. It's called the Pioneer Valley, and we had a lot of industry back in the day, and that the air was always one of the worst quality air quality areas in the country. Well, now you know that river is swimmable,
Mm.
and fish thrive in it. The air is clean, so we're not having the asthma and all the rest of it that we used to have tons of back in the day. So you know, I don't think that all regulation is bad by any stretch, but the problem becomes when you take it too far and you start strangling companies and strangling innovation because your regulations are too costly.
Yeah.
A rule of thumb in the environmental area is that it costs as much to clean up the last 5% as it did to clean up the first 95%. So if you're going to be cleaning up the first 95% and companies can survive with those costs, but you're going to saddle them with twice as much cost to clean up the last little bit, then that's a problem.
Mm.
Um, and I think that we've got this idea that if something can kill you in any amount, then no amount is safe. You know, it's got to be down to zero. Well, getting down to zero costs an enormous amount of money. And does it really make sense? I mean, is zero really what you have to have, or is there a certain parts per million that are okay?
Yeah.
It all depends on who's writing the regulations.
Solution to pollution is dilution, as they say.
Well, what I have heard, in fact, I was in a meeting with some state environmental guys one time, and what they said that is that dilution is not the solution to pollution.
Mm,
And I remember sitting there and thinking, well, why not? I mean, why not?
what is?
So I don't know.
So what was their solution was don't pollute to begin with?
Basically, they were pretty non-committal on every level.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
And
Yeah, it's nobody wants to live in a dump, but
right,
you
but
you got to think there's some byproducts that are going to happen for all the stuff that we make. So yeah, let's be smart about it, and not kill ourselves. But
yeah, if you could, the environment where I live has been cleaned up for a long time now, and everybody's used to doing the right things. And so that's great. But if you have, for example, mercury is one thing that tends to be a hot button where people want to reduce that down to zero emissions. Well, we've been dealing with whatever mercury there is in the air for a long, long time. And generally we're living longer, we're healthier. So I don't know that mercury is the serious problem that some people think it is. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. It's my thing is diabetes.
Yeah, well, you got to walk that tightrope in diabetes, just like you do with the environment. How much can the environment recover or absorb versus how much is too much. So I think they're related in that sense. Maybe the industrializer of you and the diabetes researcher side of you is connected over that issue, subconsciously or consciously.
Yeah, maybe so. But, maybe just as a general rule of life, the extremes are bad. Somewhere in the middle works for just about everybody. Somewhere in the middle is where we all belong.
Everything in moderation, including moderation.
It's kind of is that an oxymoron?
Yeah, I don't know.
It's kind of self-contradictory, isn't it?
Maybe it's don't eat Twinkies, but every now and then you have to eat a Twinkie. I don't know. No.
Well,
just to know that it makes you feel bad, and then you're like, okay, I'm not missing out.
That's funny. I guess that's a way to look at it.
Yeah, that's how I look at sugar now. If I'm doing like not eating for a day and then eating the next day, I feel better. And then when I eat something bad, I don't feel good. And then I think, okay, this is eventually it's going to get through to me that this isn't something I should be eating. And I think it does slowly, but then every now and then it's like you eat those bad things and you feel bad enough and it sets you on the straight and narrow for long enough. So maybe that's the balance of discipline. I don't know.
Well, diabetics really shouldn't be eating a whole ton of sugar, but we don't have to restrict ourselves to no sugar, much like what you're just saying. You do it once in a while. It's not going to kill you. It's not going to kill a diabetic either. With diabetes, by the way, temporary spikes in blood sugar are not what cause the problem. What causes the problem is high average blood sugars. So you can splurge once in a while. If you like pasta, which is very high in carbohydrate, you can have it, once in a while. Just don't pig out on it and don't eat it every day. You don't have to lock yourself into a jail cell and say, well, I can't ever have any sugar or any cake or whatever. You don't have to do that. You just have to be responsible by and large.
I agree. And it does help. It's helped me when you slow down and see how what you eat makes you feel.
Mm-hmm.
That way you can go, okay, and you can associate it with it instead of just gorging yourself. And then you don't know why you feel bad and you don't know why you did it or what pleasure you got from it. Then if you slow that uptake, it's easier. And then you can go, oh, this is what made me feel bad. This was okay. I felt better when I was eating this. And then you have to look at the long-term, short-term game, all that. So yeah, it's life. You're trying to figure it out.
Yep. Yep.
What's the best way for people to follow what you're doing? Is that through your website?
Yes. I'm not a diabetes expert. I know what I know, but what I really am, I think, is a transition where I'm just trying to get people to not be ignorant about it and to know enough to be helpful. Um, so if you go to the website and watch the videos, you'll be that's what I'm about, and being on podcasts and talking like this. So for more information, there's a lot of information out there, but you need to have the baseline knowledge to know what's correct and what's not. And you can go to lots of places for information, whether it's the American Diabetes Association or publications. Lord knows I've read a lot about diabetes. But the thing you need to do is know what sounds right and what doesn't. If you go on the web, there's a lot of stuff out there that is just plain bad. There's always somebody out there talking about a miracle cure for diabetes. The last one I saw was a guy who said he found a cure at the top of some mountain in a remote tropical island. And
Hmm,
these people up there never got diabetes. And now he's making it available to you for like 1995.
nice.
And they always tell you that you got to get it now because when the pharma companies find out I've got this, they're going to shut me down. There's stuff like that that's out there, and it's just unconscionable. So you need the basic information that I'm giving you just to say, well, you know what? This doesn't sound right at all. And when you look into it, you find out that it isn't right. But there are a lot of people out there who take it at face value. For example, I actually know somebody who believed that cinnamon was all she needed to eat to control her blood sugars. Well, cinnamon actually does help control blood sugars, but it doesn't do it by itself. It's just something on the fringe that can be of help. But there was an ad out there that showed up a big cinnamon bun. It was loaded with frosting. The steam was coming off it. It make you salivate just to look at it.
Yeah.
And they said the cure was cinnamon. There's cinnamon in this thing. Well, one woman that I know uh, told me that for breakfast she has toast and jam, but she sprinkles cinnamon on it, so she's okay. Well, she's not okay. And if she really believes that, then she doesn't know enough about diabetes to really take care of it responsibly. And that's something else that I'm trying to tackle.
Hmm. Yeah, it's people need to learn how to think for themselves, and then since it's such a personalized disease,
Yeah, well,
diabetes, then you have to know how it affects you particularly.
you do because I mean, even if you're not diabetic, your metabolism is not the same as anybody else's. You got to figure out what's good for you and what's not. I mean, you look at just people in general. Well, people have allergies. They've got, you know, some foods they can eat, some foods they can't. If you're active, you're going to be able to control your blood sugar better than if you're not active. We all have lifestyles that are different, and you got to figure out what works for you.
Okay, so that website then is challengediabetes.us, and in the
Yes,
show notes there, it'll be in the show notes, so people can go to it there if they forget it or can't write it down right now.
excellent.
And do you have any thoughts in closing or things you wanted to talk about that we didn't?
Um, no, not really. I think we've covered a lot. I would just like people to know that to learn the basic information is not going to take you a lot of time or effort, especially if you use the videos that are on my website. And I hope that you'll not only watch them yourself, but share them with others. I think that will do a lot of good.
All right. Well, thank you very much for your time and for all the work you put into it. I'm sure it's going to be useful for people and has been useful.
Great.
And
Thank you.
I'll check out your book on Amazon, see how it goes. I'll leave a review for you.
Great. Thanks very much.
All right. I'll talk to you on the other side of this musical exit.
Yep.